The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Talk of the Bay on KSQD, Santa Cruz, your community radio station. My name is Anne Goodman, and it's my great pleasure tonight to be presenting a dialogue between two people who for the first time are going for the position of Mayor of Santa Cruz at large. This is the first time in history, actually, there has been a position. Voters voted on it, and so now we have two people asking for your vote. If you can vote in the city of Santa Cruz, if you're from the county, you'll have to look on with interest, I suppose. Here to speak to us is Fred Keeley. In just a moment, Joy Shendledecker will be our guest as well for the hour. And your texts. Let me give you the text number where you can text your questions. We will be taking those and collecting them and reading the ones as we can get to them at 831-900-5773. Please use text, not telephone. We can't do that during this event, so we will be happy to take your texts and read your questions. So please feel welcome to do that as we progress with the interview. Hi, Fred. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Rachel Ann. Always a pleasure.
It's good
to see you.
Yes, welcome. So you've done a lot of things in politics. You've been an assembly member. You've been very involved with the National Marine Sanctuary. What urged you, or was it someone else who urged you to run for mayor after all this many different roles you've held?
Well, I think I might just answer your question in 30 seconds from now, because I want to start with our community today has experienced a very traumatic moment with what could have been an active shooter situation at Santa Cruz High School. And perhaps at some other schools where calls were made in to them about that. And it seems to me that our school administrators, our school teachers, our classified personnel, parents, students, the police department, the sheriff's department, CHP, everyone who responded did an outstanding job under a very difficult situation to deal with the emotional situation that students and parents found themselves in. And from what I could see and hear over at Depot Park, as well as around the school, that our community responded in the way we can, just like we did during the earthquake and other difficult situations, which is that we banded together, cared about each other, took care of each other. So I want to shout out to the community at large and all the component parts, how well they handled this situation today. But to get to your question about why running, I wasn't thinking about this prior to the June election. And when the June election happened, I was one of the two or three sort of primary leaders of the No on D campaign, the campaign to keep the intercity rail line and to defeat the so-called Greenway initiative, which was neither green nor the way. So when this opportunity or this situation arose for the city the voters to change how they elect their mayor and city council members, folks came and talked to me and my wife about the possibility of running, and people were so kind and generous in that it made some sense to do that, given my background and experience, that maybe I could be helpful as the first directly elected mayor. I suspect we're going to, in this new districted environment for city council members, I suspect we're going to see what I call, and I mean it as a compliment, neighborhood politicians, folks who really know their neighborhood well, but maybe don't have as much experience in elective office and so on. And they will have goals and objectives and values that they want to pursue. And I think with the kind of background I have, whether it's in elective office or appointed in these various task forces throughout the years that city and county have asked me to head up, that achieving consensus and driving towards respecting everybody who's engaged in the process, that I probably have the kind of background and skills that might be helpful for this first directly elected mayor's position. And the response to that during the campaign has been what I had hoped it would be, with regard to endorsements and support and talking to people, walking precincts and so on. It's been very both edifying and gratifying. We still have 12 more days, and the campaign will continue to put one foot in front of the other all the way across the finish line. And I'm very honored to have this opportunity to run.
Thank you, Fred Keeley. And with us is also Joy Shendledecker. Welcome. I haven't met you before, but it's nice to meet you across the microphone. Thank you for coming in and
Hi,
sharing
Rachel.
your ideas.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry I was a minute late.
It's okay. As a host, I'm always a little nervous when I don't see the chair full of guests, but I understand we have traffic issues. So tell me the same answer, if you don't mind, to the question is, what inspired you to run for this mayoral position, the first ever in Santa Cruz history?
Well, there's a few reasons. One is that over the last few years, I've been watching City Council more closely, and I want to be part of making positive changes there in terms of transparency and accountability, in terms of bringing my commitment to collective care and mutual aid into the writing of ordinances and the oversight of budgets. I think when we pass ordinances and allocate our funding, we should be doing it to help people.
So the first question is more of a general one, which is I don't know much about you. Not sure our listeners do. Fred's been in town a long time. So share a little bit about your background. You haven't held elected office. So what kind of experiences might bring to bear being an elected official in the first mayor's position that you have?
Well, I think what most people would see as the most directly related experience would be I was on the Board of Governors for a London primary school for 2 years when my family lived there. So, that's a position where you work with the city council and their lawyers. You oversee curriculum and budgeting, child welfare, facilities stuff. So that's probably the closest to an elected position. I think that I'm 47. I have 2 parents. I have a teenager who is in 10th grade at Santa Cruz High. And I'm an artist, and I've done paid and unpaid work in arts administration, community organizing, waste reduction programs, community gardens. And, these kinds of non-traditional leadership positions aren't really recognized in our culture. And the work of stay-at-home parents, mostly women, is also still not recognized as being legitimate and equal to other kinds of work. It's very difficult work. It requires endless commitment, body and soul, and sacrifice for the collective good, diplomacy, all sorts of things. So some people might not recognize that or value that as good enough to be an elected position, but I think that it is, and I think that we have a history of local leaders coming from non-traditional backgrounds, backgrounds that are not coming from, previously elected positions.
And I just want to acknowledge what Fred said earlier. Your parent at Santa Cruz High, it must have been a horrible day in this morning for you, so I'm really sorry.
Yeah, it was absolutely terrifying, and we feel traumatized, as do friends and fellow parents. And it's a relief that it wasn't an actual threat at the moment. But in the moment, when I grabbed my child from the corner of Walnut and Mission, where they were on their way to second period. They haven't opened first, so they didn't actually make it to school. But for us, it was very, very real for a period of time. And yes, I think it's going to take a while I don't think people are going to get over that. I think people hold that fear in them since we've seen the rise of mass shootings over 20 years. People have that anxiety in them already.
Yeah, we're definitely on edge. And, here as a media organization, I caution my colleagues to be very careful about what they said. Because the rumor, I actually was teaching a media studies class about fake news. And I said, the first thing you do is not announce it in the wrong way. And we looked at the headlines from all over the world, and they said reported shooter. And that was probably not the headline that needed to be out there.
It was terrifying. But, my kid was getting text messages from children who were inside the school. And, so that's challenging as well.
And here we are talking about, the city, and there's really no right answer to what do we do, to make our communities safer, because it's such a complex answer. I don't really even know if there is one, but maybe I'll throw that over to Fred, and we'll transition to the traditional city topics in a moment. But since this is what's happening today, and it does, in other cities, people politicize these things, and I would like to think we don't. We're just trying to think together about making it safer for all of our kids and communities. So I'll just toss that open-ended question to you. How do we make our town safer? And that wasn't even a threat. It was some hoax person, right? We want to make sure that people know that.
Well, it seems to me that we should, as we are dealing emotionally with this situation, which did directly touch literally thousands of families in our community, including the parents of students, but also including the families of teachers, classified personnel, certificated personnel, administrative personnel, everybody associated with that campus, presumably has a family of some kind or other. And every one of those, I suspect, is going through something that isn't going to be over when they wake up tomorrow morning going, well, back to business. The good news, I think, is, as I mentioned earlier, how well planned. I mean, it was sad to have to plan for this. We understand that, and we can get to that issue, in a little bit. But as to what happened today, what was the response like? I think we can take a deep breath of appreciation that the planning and the implementation of those plans in real time proved how caring and decent and wonderful we are as a community. The issues that brought about the idea of school shootings in our country is a different question. But as to this, I think we should say, when we need that, we see this interdisciplinary, interagency, big family of both government and families all doing the same thing, which is protecting children correctly.
I want to bring up the issue of police funding, because they were involved today, and there has been a little bit of a difference between you two in terms of what you think the budget ought to be for local police. That conversation is a nationwide one, but each community has it slightly differently. So I wonder if you could let the listeners know who are listening, what's your take on proper amounts of funding and responsive training of police? We'll start with Fred, and then we'll go to Joy.
Okay. Well, it seems to me that the primary duty of government at all levels is public safety, that we want to keep our nation, our state, our city, our neighborhoods safe. And that's the primary job of government, is to keep us safe and secure. And that manifests itself in a wide variety of ways. Joy and I have had this conversation many times, and every time we have it, it gets more nuanced, I think. And that is that with regard to public safety, Joy pointed this out at the paradox debate that we had last week about how do you define public safety? Is it only police? Is it police and all kinds of other things? And she and I have agreement on that it is police and all kinds of other things when it comes to public safety. But as it relates to the police budget, we have what I think is quite a good police department. We have a couple of very major challenges in filling vacancies. One of them is Santa Cruz is considered essentially a training department. It costs about $750,000 from the moment you hire someone to the time that they are in a police car. And that is field training, classroom training, all kinds of things. And it deals with all kinds of situations. And the problem is that it's hard to recruit and retain in our community. So we have about 20 of the 40 funded but unfilled positions in the police department are around that. It's hard to get folks because of the cost of living here and so on. That's an issue addressed by what are the wage and compensation packages we give to all public employees. We just saw that in the recent strike where the workers, correctly in my view, did not want to accept the offer on the table without more, and they went on strike for a week, which is the only way labor has of really leveraging its power, is to withhold its labor. As to the police department, they have a specific and complicated role. It is enhanced in terms of public safety through all kinds of other safety actions in our community, whether that's mental health issues or so on, or responses and so on. Joy and I have also talked about the idea of, is it possible to, and the answer is yes, is it possible to treat some 911 calls for assistance in a way that is not solely a police response? And of course the answer is yes, and we've both spoken about that, whether it's the Cahoots program that exists in some places or other kinds of dual and triple dispatching to make sure the right folks are responding to the situation. I think it's already going on in parts in Santa Cruz County between the mental health department and city police and the sheriff's office. But I think that we are not overpaying for our police department. I think that they do an excellent job. They get better all the time. We have not had what I would call deep-seated police problems in Santa Cruz in terms of the police being the enemy of the public. I will say that probably 40 years ago and even 30 years ago, I wouldn't be able to say that. I think that the police department and the community were at odds with each other for many years. I think that's been many years since we have not. And I think they do a very good job, and we should continue to support them.
If you just joined me, I'm speaking with two mayoral candidates, You're going to have to tell me. It's Shendledecker, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. I apologize.
It's okay.
And Fred Keeley. And Joy, what's your take on the police funding question?
You know, the percentage of the city budget that's been going to the police has risen, it inches up year on year. And at the same time, crime hasn't gone up in a commensurate way. So I don't think it's justified that we now have 31.2% of our police budget, going just to the police department, especially when public safety and emergency response is so important. I think that, we've heard, of course, Andy Mills is no longer our chief, but it was, very telling a couple of years ago when he said that about 80% of their calls are for things that are nonviolent and not what they're trained to do. And he expressed some support for alternative emergency response. And I'm really glad that over the past few years, there has been some opening up to that idea by city leaders, because it was rebuffed. The city council refused to study an alternative emergency response program in 2020. So we've made a little movement. We could do a lot more. We do have a complaints-driven policing policy that creates crime hotspots. And I don't think that that's the best way to respond to crime. I appreciate that we have a level of training and response to violent incidents. And at the same time, I don't think that we should use incidents like this to justify continued militarization of our police department and continuing to raise the percentage of our overall budget going to the police.
Can you expand on what you meant by militarization of our police?
Well, we've known that police departments across the nation are militarized, have been increasingly militarized over the past few decades. The purchase of Bearcat is a great example of that. There are programs where municipal police departments get good deals on decommissioned military equipment. And it's only now that we have AB 481 in the wake of the George Floyd uprising, where protesters were tear gassed and where military-grade weapons were used against civilians, that we have federal legislation for more transparency. So we know now what military-grade equipment our police department has. And I think that that's a good step towards more transparency and accountability, and really looking at what particular equipment do we need to really keep us safe. I don't think that we need a sound cannon that indiscriminately can injure every living thing within a mile.
Is that something we do have?
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that.
Right, because, it's on the city's, the police department's website now, but it's not something that's been well publicized, and we don't have a good, robust public safety oversight committee that's made up of members from the public, where there's real engagement and transparency and communication and accountability. So, I don't think we need an arsenal of tear gas. These are chemical weapons that are dangerous to all living things. They cause reproductive harm. They damage, they're persistent toxins in our waterways. They are indiscriminate within a mile. We don't use that, and we don't need that. So I think Santa Cruz City Police Department has militarized along with many other municipal police departments. And I think militarization and toxic masculinity are two things that are wrapped up in school shootings. It is a complex issue, but we have a crisis of toxic masculinity in our world. And right now that's not getting better. And I think that we do need to find ways locally and beyond to address it.
Fred, do you want to follow up on that?
Sure, I'd be interested. I think you just maybe suggested in there, or at least it wasn't clear, that in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, were you suggesting that Santa Cruz Police Department used tear gas, or let me finish this, that the Santa Cruz Police Department used tear gas, or that the Santa Cruz Police Department rolled out the Bearcat or a sound gun or anything else? Because if it did, I missed it. What I saw was a community that came together after the George Floyd murder with some great leadership by folks like our African-American mayor at the time, Justin Cummings, doing some of the most thoughtful, serious work I've ever seen an elected official do to make sure that our community could have its voice heard about what a terrible, tragic event the murder of George Floyd was, and how our community wanted to be in solidarity in that situation. And what I saw was that Justin Cummings and the police chief at the time had a very salutary effect on making sure through community outreach, communication, and direct engagement that our community did what Santa Cruz usually does, and that's the right doggone thing. peacefully protesting, making sure that people understood our community was outraged by this. But I don't recall your suggestion that the Santa Cruz police used tear gas and weaponized and militarized the response, because I didn't see it and I don't think it happened.
Well, no, in the city of Santa Cruz, the police...
Oh, that's what I thought.
The police did not use, but we did provide mutual aid to police in Oakland, where tear gas was used against protesters. And I'm not saying that Santa Cruz city police officers did use tear gas on protesters in Oakland, but they did go there to provide mutual aid. There was community pushback against that from
well, I'm glad, because I wanted to make sure that we were clear.
Me.
Glad to get clear on what's going on there.
So what I did say is that it was in the wake of the George Floyd uprisings. It was actually a legislator from Portland who introduced the legislation nationally. But, these weapons have been used against protesters in Detroit, in Flint, in all sorts of other cities. Just because they haven't been used here doesn't mean that they're not used elsewhere, and doesn't mean that we don't provide mutual aid to other police departments when these things happen in other communities that are much more black and poor than ours. Now, at the same time, okay, there's evidence that we don't need them in our community. We haven't used them. We don't need them. My point is that it should be a community conversation. We pay the police from our budget. They work for us. They should be accountable for us, and we should have a say in how they spend their money and what equipment they have. It's not up to them to decide what keeps us safe. It's up to all of us to decide.
Do you think that that the police auditor, which we have in Santa Cruz, is a good idea or a bad idea? I think it's a very good idea, and I think it's proven that. I would also like to point out that when Butch and Elizabeth were murdered, the two police officers, probably before you got here in 2015, but the murder of two of our police officers, the response to that in the real moment was a fire truck was dispatched so that the officers responding to their murder with an active shooter inside, there was a fire truck dispatched. And the fire department will tell you they don't believe that fire trucks being dispatched to that kind of situation for purposes of defending the police against an active shooter is a terrifically good idea. But that may have been before you got here.
Again, I'll say I think this is an important community conversation to have where, we are participating in oversight accountability. If the people want to have a Bearcat, then have a Bearcat, but it needs to be part of a democratic process. And I do think that the independent auditor is a good step in the right direction. I think we can do more. And why not? Why not do more?
If you just joined me, this is KSQD, KSQD Santa Cruz. I'm Rachel Anne Goodman. We have two candidates for mayor talking about policing and budgeting and what kind of weapons they may or may not be allowed to have under what conditions. We will be right back after a very short break with more from Joy and Fred and your texts. If you would like to ask them a question, this is your opportunity in the next half hour here on the radio, and you can text us at 831-900-5773. Again, 831-900-5773. And we'll be right back after this short message. And thank you. You're tuned to KSQD, KSQD, Santa Cruz. I'm here with Joy Shendledecker and Fred Keeley, both of them vying for the position for the first time in history of mayor of Santa Cruz City. And I'm going to move on to transportation now and talk about how people get around. You were just slightly late because of traffic. If everyone had been on the bus, of course, you probably wouldn't have had to, but then again, you would have been on the bus, maybe, or not been on time. Who knows? It's complicated like every city issue you all are going to be tackling. But let's talk about it for a moment. What do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges in the transportation sector for the city How do you get people around here without frustrating them in their cars? We'll start with Joy and then go to Fred.
Yeah. Normally, I ride my bike over here from the west side because there's a really nice back path that avoids all the traffic. But I was actually subjected to a nonviolent attempted bike jacking over the weekend where somebody actually just snuck up behind me while I was talking to somebody and rode off with my bike. When we got it back, but it's in the shop for a repair. It was a little bit dramatic. And, it was an interesting thing. I was talking to the guy at the bike shop afterwards, and just having a chat about bike theft and where the responsibility lies. The thing that people assume first is like, was it a homeless guy? And actually, it seems like the theft of more expensive bikes is really more part of like organized crime rings, sort of like in the vein of catalytic converter thefts and organized mail theft. So that was an interesting conversation to have. I think that riding bikes is a wonderful, wonderful way to still have independence in transportation and some autonomy, which, everybody likes. I love to be able to jump on my bike and sort of come and go and not be on a bus schedule. But now I'm, stuck in traffic and annoyed, and I do wish that there was a more frequent bus system, more lines, more frequently, and better coverage. And funding that, I think, is absolutely essential to helping get cars off the roads. We know that widening doesn't work. We know that gas is more expensive. We know that public transportation is essential to economic equity and for climate change responses. So, I wish that as the city of Santa Cruz, we could determine our own public transportation landscape. We do have to work with another agency and other municipalities. I'd like to see more wealth taxes that we can funnel part of towards public transportation so that we can get those routes increased and also subsidize fares for as many people as we can.
Fred, what about you? What's on your mind when it comes to how to make it better than it is? Of course, COVID kind of is over there, and it's still happening, but it's not affecting like it was. So it's really hard to find out what's normal. The baseline is removed, right? So we'll just have to start from now, looking forward. What do you think the biggest priorities are for you?
Well, for me, the biggest priorities are coming out of Measure D in June, where there was an attempt to tear up the rail line between Santa Cruz and Watsonville, which is at its heart a race and class issue, as far as I'm concerned. And as one of the leaders of the effort to defeat Measure D, the so-called Greenway Initiative, which was neither green nor the way, and the voters rejected it by 30% in favor and 70% against. I think what we learned is that the voters meant what they said several years ago, which is that we want a multimodal approach to transit and transportation. And that's exactly what I believe the Transportation Commission and the Transit Authority are doing. And the way cities articulate their position on that is through membership on both the Metro Board and the Regional Transportation Commission. Within the city has responsibilities, obviously, for the city streets and bike paths and all of that, and there is an active effort underway, and it's already being built, is the bike path that is associated with the rail trail project. I testified before the California Transportation Commission last week in favor of the city's application and the county's application for additional funding for additional segments of that rail trail project, and specifically the trail component. I do think that there is a new executive director, general manager of the Metro District, and that person met with him for a couple of hours the other day, and he has, I think, a Santa Cruz-style vision of what the bus service could be. We essentially run through Metro 3 distinct bus systems. We run an over-the-hill Highway 17 Express bus system, which is largely used by folks who live here and work in the Silicon Valley. We then have the more traditional kind of grid system in the urban areas throughout the county, and then we have a rural bus system. They're all run by Metro, but they are all very, very different. And the reason that they're different is because in the 1970s, the voters of Santa Cruz County and all the cities put in place an evergreen sales tax, meaning it exists forever. So the public has, for the better part of 45 years, continued its unfailing, unwavering support for public transit. And I think as we continue moving forward with the rail trail, with the rail component of that, that'll be quite helpful, both on a race and class basis, but on a congestion relief basis as well. I do think that within the city of Santa Cruz, the work underway to make it safer to be on a bike without a dedicated, grade-separated bike lane, that where the Public Works Department has been making it safer by putting up bollards and other traffic warning devices to keep drivers from just drifting into the bicycle lanes, is a positive public works effort, and we should continue that. So I think there's, just like there has been for many years in Santa Cruz, both the county and the city, a continued effort to make the modal split, as the planners call it, which is to say less people in their cars, more people as pedestrians or bicycle riders, whatever it may be, and providing the safe infrastructure for them. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected mayor, I would continue in those veins.
Thank you. I want to move over to downtown building heights. That's been a big issue for a lot of people, looking at the growth and wondering how high is it going to go? Are we going to look like Walnut Creek? So I've heard a lot of that concern about building height, and I think I'll start with Joy about what might be done, can be done. Is it too late to do? About the, Walnut Creekification, I guess is one word you could use. I was just up there, so it's on my mind. I used to live in the East Bay, and I came back, and after many years, I hadn't been there, and it just shocked me how different it felt, kind of canyon-like. So what's your take on what could be done? If you're mayor, what would you do about that, if anything?
Yeah. Well, regarding the downtown expansion plan, I do ultimately think that the planning department has been right several times in proposing that the building heights max out at the same height as the current downtown, which I believe is 8 stories. It might be 9, but 8 or 9 stories. Basically like the Palomar, keeping things sort of in character. For me, the biggest issue with that downtown expansion plan is calling it a new neighborhood when it already is a neighborhood. I think is a fundamental democratic error on the part of the current city council majority. I think that the community wasn't consulted enough, and not enough outreach was done in Spanish. And so the plan is being imposed on that area rather than being developed with them. And it's also in a floodplain. The city's own climate change projections are that area will be flooded during storm surge and climate-driven, like atmospheric river events by 2030. So to me, it doesn't make the most sense from a climate change perspective and from like a participatory democracy, community-led grassroots perspective to impose this project on that area. I think it's too much market driven and not enough affordability. And I think that there are people there who are sending me messages that they do not want their homes destroyed. Their homes and businesses and community centers are slated for destruction, and they're upset about it. And that is not about the height of the building. That is about where the building is in particular, right? Like, it could be a one-story building. It's still going to destroy their current abode, whether it's 1 story or 20 stories. And, I don't know that we should be putting all our eggs in one basket in terms of fulfilling our RHNA numbers, our housing requirements in one area. I do think that some densification is a good thing in terms of walkability and, transit corridors and all that stuff. But I don't actually think that we want to concentrate in a single neighborhood. I think we have every neighborhood has an area that could be densified.
Thank you. And Fred, what's your plan for the downtown expansion plan, if elected?
It seems to me that when the city of Santa Cruz began a process which was in public, repeated public meetings and hearings, that for the stage we're in now, which is what does the city forward on to environmental review? What is the basic template here? That they erred grievously. And that is that I don't know 5 people out of the 60,000 people that live in Santa Cruz who, when it was announced that there could be 17 to 20-story buildings, said, well, thank God we finally got there. Like Joy, I walk precincts all the time. I go to house parties. I go to house meetings. I go to endorsement events. I go to candidates forums. And uniformly, people say 3 things. What are you going to do about homelessness? What are you going to do about affordable housing? And what the hell's going on in downtown Santa Cruz? It isn't even, like, gee, let's talk about this. It's what the hell's going on downtown Santa Cruz, these 20-story, 17-story, and so on. So I have tried to take the collective information coming in to me as a candidate, speaking with thousands of people during this campaign, and bring a stop to what is being reviewed right now. It is a waste of the public's time, the government's time, the people's money as expressed by the government spending, to spend 1 more cent or 1 more day pursuing a downtown plan expansion that will absolutely be rejected by the public, and the council won't vote for it. So why don't we instead, and this is the proposal that I put out yesterday, is say, all right, based on all the information and all the input over 4 months of campaigning, what do I at least discern from all of that input might make sense? And so I released an item yesterday that if elected mayor, that in January I will carry an agenda item to the Board of Supervisors bringing an immediate stop to spending any time or money on the current downtown expansion plan EIR review of a set of buildings and proposals that simply won't ever happen. And instead, to take what I at least heard, and I'm continuing to hear, that folks do like the idea that we will increase density downtown and that we will be able to add an honest amount of affordable housing, that we will not have skyscrapers downtown, that instead of having 1,600 minimum housing units, the proposal I made yesterday is 1,600 capped. That's it. That get rid of all of this discussion of skyscrapers. Joy is exactly right. The tallest building in downtown Santa Cruz is the Palomar. Now, how you calculate stories is different from one building to the next. But what's the height of the ceiling? What is it used for? All the rest of it. But in the residential housing, multifamily residential housing world, 12 stories is 1 story taller than the Palomar. And not all the buildings, or nearly any of them, are going to be 12 stories. Some may be. My proposal is cap it at 12 stories, cap it at 1,600 new residents, and also make sure that there's no funny business with how you calculate the 20% affordable housing. Joy and I have talked about this repeatedly on the campaign trail. Neither one of us like the idea that when you apply the percentage and then you get the density bonus, when all is said and done, you're only building 12, 13, 14% affordable. My proposal yesterday, an honest 20% affordable. So I think that that's what leadership looks like, is you listen to thousands of people over many, many months and say, well, here's what I conclude all of that means. And then put it out in a public venue in January and let the debate and discussion ensue. Because we won't, even if I'm elected, and I say we, then even in January, this is nowhere near. We're at least 1.5 years away from getting into specific design questions about how much open space, what do you do with the setbacks, what is the window treatment, all that kind of stuff that people love to talk about. All of that is in the future. Right now it's what is the basic set of what we are evaluating. And I think what I proposed yesterday is a dramatic reduction in what was being proposed and fits nicely with at least where I hear thousands of people saying they want to have this conversation framed this way.
Thank you. So I don't know if you have a response to that, but I did want to make sure we save time for the other topic that you just mentioned, which is houselessness, homelessness, however you want to phrase it. And I think we have also someone who got a question in edgewise. Oh, it's long. 200-word question. Okay. First, let me...
Is that longer than our ballot statements?
Sorry. It's okay. We'll try to get one of them. But why don't you start us off talking about dealing with homelessness, which is also on everybody's mind, and everybody acknowledges it's complicated, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because the ultimate solution to houselessness is housing, and we don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough Section 8 housing, subsidized housing, public housing. So I think that we need to, acknowledge that, keep working on housing people, working on the housing front, and also acknowledge that we will have people who need street-level services for a number of years to come, especially as we're entering into or deepening our economic crisis. And I think, wraparound services, a navigation center, storage, there's a lot of ideas that have come out of community processes, the grand jury report and the cash report over the past few years, that we have not done or we haven't done enough. So that to me is a good place to start. We've already studied a lot and have a lot of ideas for moving forward. I think that having community conversations, neighborhood-based community conversations around how we can be neighbors, because the fact is that the majority of people who live outside have been our neighbors, our friends and family for many years. Many people were born here or they've lived here for a long time. And it's a minority of people who engage in sort of antisocial behaviors or things that are illegal. And we can work with the laws that we already have on those. And we can work in more positive ways to prime neighborhoods to accept, say, Project Home Key developments, where we know that we can get grant money to purchase buildings or to build new buildings. But we want to be working with the communities starting now so that we don't have people feeling like things are sprung on them and then they have a kind of knee-jerk reaction pushing back. So that's a kind of like emotional side of it that's not so brick and mortar, but I think that it's actually incredibly important.
Thank you. Fred?
Some time ago, the city of Santa Cruz, the mayor and the city council asked me if I would serve as the convener of the Council Advisory Committee on Homelessness. And convener means that I was the presiding officer, did not have a vote. My volunteer job was to help them get their work done and be able to make recommendations in an organized, structured way. And each council member had 2 appointees, and some of those folks were folks living outside, and then the body itself appointed, which was permitted under the resolution that established the Council Advisory Committee on Homelessness, appointed 4 more folks who had either had or lived, experienced outside, living outside, or were at that time living outside. And that went on for about a year, met every other week for a year. Moved the discussions around the community, as Joy's talking about, getting community input. Received information from various cities about how they were dealing with it in effective ways. And I think it's no surprise what the conclusions were. Number one, that the unhoused community is as complicated as the housed community. It's just you can see everything about the unhoused community. Secondly, that there are roles for government in dealing with this. Mercifully, we have a very large, robust, well-funded, experienced nonprofit sector that is helpful as well. But they should not be the folks who are expected to be the lead on this. This is a governmental challenge. And I think in that regard, it's important to have the units of government that are implicated in this, which is to say the state and the county and the city, do their parts and do what they're designed to do. Counties are subdivisions of the state of California. They exist to deliver health and human services from the state and federal government. TANF, Medi-Cal, mental health services, all the suite of health and human services. That is what counties do. They stand in the shoes of the state and federal government. Cities build things. There's no city health department or city mental health department or city human services department. That is all county functions. Now, the city of Santa Cruz wisely functions core community programs out of its general fund, but it's not its primary job. So what is the primary job? To me, it is 3 things. It is building shelter, because I think Gavin Newsom got it right during his first State of the State address when he said, shelter solves your sleeping problem. Permanent supportive housing solves your homelessness problem. And although that might be, it's a clever line, it's accurate, sort of. It's more complicated than that, but I thought he got it essentially right. And cities can be very, very helpful in addressing this very specifically. Building shelter, building navigation center, building permanent supportive housing, into which the county government and nonprofits such as the folks over at Housing Matters pour the services into those physical structures. And if I'm elected mayor, I've said it publicly and privately, I intend to engage in a lengthy public process to fashion a bond that would deal with those 3 elements of what I think the city's responsibility are on homelessness and providing additional funding for very low and low-income housing.
Well, believe it or not, we've come to almost the end of the program, so we have a minute each to wrap up. Tell us anything more that you didn't get to say about why people should vote for you as opposed to the other person, or anything you want to leave us with in just a minute to spare. I'm sorry it's short, but I know you can do it. Joy?
I will try. I'll just say, it's been great running for mayor. I've really enjoyed myself, and it's been enlivening to be in these conversations with Fred. I Fred likes to say that there's hardly any light between us, but I think in our conversations, we do share a lot of the same values, I think. But in terms of how we want to get there, there are some significant differences in the policies that we would pursue in every area, whether it's housing, environmental issues, policing, and governance and transparency and accountability. So with all due respect, I would urge people to look at my website where I've put my position statements, and people are welcome to email me or find me on social media. I try as best I can to respond to people individually as quickly as I can. So my website is joyforsantacruz.com. The FOR is written out. Also on all the social medias. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Joy. I appreciate you making
Rachel.
the time. Fred, last word in a minute or less.
I'll make it less. Thank you very much, Rachel. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank the voters of the city of Santa Cruz for 3 times electing me to office as a county supervisor, a county treasurer, and a state legislator. And it's been a pleasure to work with folks in the nonprofit world for decades in providing those resources for us to be a better and stronger community. It has also been, if you would allow me to use the word, a joy to be with Joy during this campaign.
Are always welcome.
And yes, exactly. And that has been a joy, and I look forward to the election on November 8th and respectfully request the vote of the voters in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you for both for being here. And if you don't mind, we're doing election night coverage. If we can call you and check in, that would be great.
Yes, please.
All right. Thanks so much. This is KSQD Santa Cruz. I'm Rachel Anne Goodman. And this has been a dialogue between 2 candidates for mayor of Santa Cruz, the first time ever.